A very warm welcome and good evening, everyone. I am Ramjan Sarkar, and I'm super glad to introduce our guest speaker, Sidhant Gupta. Sidhant is a serial entrepreneur and who has founded and several companies working in the field of AI, such an open ocean camera, which provides unpowered underwater cameras for marine researchers and studies, as well as Clearbot that provides AI-powered ocean mobility solution and serves use cases such as trash collection and cargo movement. He's a Guinness World Record setter and a TEDx speaker, and it's truly an honor to have him today, and who is here to share his view on how we could use for our social and environmental challenges.
Hi everybody. Very nice to see you. My name is Sidhant, and it's been a pleasure. Also, our company works with the Indika AI team a little bit, so I absolute pleasure working with you guys over the last year. Congratulations on this milestone. So I was hoping today. I don't know if you guys want to do Q&A first, or otherwise I can talk a little bit about our products, and then we can get started.
Hi, Sidhant. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Hardik.
Hi, hello. Sure. The first thing, in fact, that we would want to know is more about Clearbot, what we've built, and how's been the journey so far. It's over to you.
Sure. Basically, with Clearbot, what we're doing is we're making a kind of robotic, self-driving electric boat, right? And the basic concept is that today, most of the boats, if you see, they're running on gasoline, on petrol or diesel, right? And actually, that's first of all, it's very polluting to the environment, but also it's quite expensive, right? The second is there's a lot of marine tasks, especially where you don't actually need that many people, right? So a good example is kind of one of our big use cases is collecting trash out of the water, the marine cleanup work, right? So almost all the governments are today spending money to clean up waste or like or algae or these plants from rivers, lakes, shore sides, and basically people go out in these diesel boats or petrol boats and then collect it out by hand. So we basically see an opportunity where we can create a kind of environmental impact as well as kind of profitably cut the cost. So our company, Clearbot specifically, we're making these electric boats. They're about 3.5 meters long, 1.5 meters wide, and they can go out and collect waste out using AI, right? So we use AI to kind of detect the trash in the water. The boats can collect it and bring it back to shore. And we also help our clients with reporting and compliance. So another thing that AI is able to do is it's constantly running in the background and it's counting every time there's a piece of trash collected, we count it. We add it to the database. And the advantage is that at the end of let's say a month, you're telling the client who have cleaned up 3 tons of waste, you actually have some evidence to prove that along with photographs. And they feel very good about that because that eventually helps them tell the story about how the solution is brought about.
So, certainly, right. So, as we have been working together, it's been a very good journey, and I know the kind of societal and environmental impact that Clearbot and open ocean cameras are making. The first thing that I would want to understand, as we want to talk about how we can use AI to solve these problems, uh, as per your opinion, right? What are the key problems that the world is facing today in terms of environmental challenges, societal challenges? Forget about AI, right? Say AI would be a way to solve it, but as per your opinion, what are the key problems that we humankind should be aware of and we should be concerned of, and we should try to solve them?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the biggest ones is definitely climate change in general, right? There's a whole lot of pollution. I mean,
Correct.
if anyone's lived in Delhi, if anyone here is in Delhi right now, you will know that in reality.
Correct.
Of course, there's a lot of pollution, and I think air pollution specifically with CO2 emissions is starting to really create a big issue for climate change. And
Mhm.
even this year, I think was one of the hottest years in India, right?
Correct.
So globally, in fact, that's a pattern globally. So I think that is a very big issue because it eventually it affects people's livelihoods. Right, it'll cause migration. It causes sea levels to rise, and so the effect is not just that the temperature is rising. Eventually, the effect is even on the water, on water life, corals, all of these things. So the whole ecosystem is kind of affected.
Okay.
So I think that is a very big one. And maybe apart from that, I would say kind of what we are looking at also with marine waste, right?
Correct.
So not just marine waste, in fact, to be honest, waste in general, right? So the way we consume products today, on most of it is not very recyclable, right? Most of it is we use a bag one time and then it's there on Earth basically forever, sitting in a landfill, right? So,
Correct.
I mean, there's definitely an issue with how our processes work, and I think that is a very big issue again environmentally that we should be looking at.
Interesting. So when we talk about environmental and societal challenges, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Sustainable Development Goals, right, which the United Nations has provided. I would like you to address and explain to our audience what these Sustainable Development Goals are and why are they really important for any countries, right, which is seriously considering solving these societal and environmental challenges.
Sure. So basically, the Sustainable Development Goals, they were created by the UN actually in 2000. Funnily enough, so that countries can hit those goals by 2020. But we are in 2022 and still, figuring it out. But the idea was to actually give countries, not only countries, actually even companies, right, a framework to be like, okay, first of all, whatever we're doing, where does it fit into the grand scheme of things, right? So that they basically divided the world's problems and solutions into 18 different categories, right? And they said that, okay, within each of these categories, there are some targets that we want to reach. For example, with clean water and sanitation, there is some target, right, that we're able to give, all the people 100% purity drinking water at all periods of time. Something as simple as that. So they have divided each category into sub targets, and the idea is that so initially it was just countries adopting it, saying, okay, at a national level, we will frame policy to make sure that we're hitting these. But what we've seen over the last decade is even companies at an individual level are saying, okay, actually, whatever we are doing fits into so and so SDG, right? And therefore, we can actually set our corporate governance. We can kind of create our own goals to be in line with this. And kind of the idea is that if enough companies, if enough countries, if enough people do this together, then in fact we are creating that momentum to actually hit those goals, right?
Correct. Awesome. So, all right. So, certainly we understand how important the SDGs are, as you highlighted. So, let's talk about how do we use AI to solve these problems, right? There are several problems which are very, very concerning for the human society. Talk about poverty, hunger, climate change, right? A war which is happening. We are in a world now,
Mm.
at least I can say that we are at a stage that World War III might start or it might have already started. We never know, right? So, what do you think about how do we use AI to maybe prevent it, or if there is a solution to, so how do we use it to solve it?
That's a very good question. Now, well, what I will say is societal problems, it's a little harder for AI to do things, right? Humans are
Okay.
humans. We have to figure it out kind of between ourselves. But definitely, at least with environmental problems, I have some understanding on how AI can be applied, right? So we have, I think if you look at environmental issues, right, there are two key patterns you'll see across all the environmental issues. The first is that we don't understand it fully. Like we don't actually have an in-depth understanding of what is going on. So even with climate change, it basically took about 20 years to really get an idea to understand, oh, these are the things that are causing it, right? And therefore how to start tackling it. And it's very much the same with most of the other environmental issues, right? So the one thing that AI is able to do very well is number one, it can automate the collection of data. So I mean, one of the projects we did with you guys itself is labeling waste trash, right? And now that's used in Hong Kong over here too. And actually, the government is counting all the waste that's been collected, for example, in our boats, right? Now, the advantage is that they are actually generating data and they're starting to understand, oh, where is this waste coming from? What percentage is what material? If we need to do recycling, where do we even start? What recycling plant do we put up? They can only know this if they have the data to understand what's in the waste, right? So AI's first thing that it does is it can help solve this problem of understanding, where it can do analytics if you have a lot of data, and it can also help generate the data in the first place, right? And that itself helps us actually tackle environmental problems. The second pattern you see with environmental problems is that there's a lack of resources to actually solve it, right? And mind you, it's usually not money. And maybe clear, governments have enough money to solve the environmental problems, right? But there's usually more like manpower, technology, on the ground resources. And again, that is where I think artificial intelligence is kind of coming in more and more, where you can do a lot more because of the artificial intelligence in on the ground with even the same manpower. A good example again being actually our products, right? So our products allow us to then have the same deployment for a very long period of time with the same number of staff. You can do much more cleanup, much more data collection, and so I think where AI is coming in is it's augmenting us to do more with the same resources in terms of manpower on the ground. and it's increasing our understanding of these environmental issues. So
Hmm.
that's kind of where it can add value.
Awesome. But you mentioned one point which brings me to a very interesting question. So when we talk about societal problem, when we talk about environmental problems, somewhere we have this assumption in mind that okay, this is something that the government has to take care, or maybe a common individual person has to take care. This is not something that businesses would do, right? So do you think it is something that can only happen with the sponsorship from the government bodies or non-profit organizations, or it is possible to create business models which can scale up, which can be profitable, or which can which can fetch unicorn valuations, right? So, do you foresee startups and business models which are solving these societal and environmental problems with AI? And still building a really good business. I'm sure Clearbot is one example of that, but I would love to know the broader picture of it.
No, no, absolutely. So I'll start with your point is how you started, which is saying that we expect the government to do things. Now, between you and me, I mean we've all well, the government we know is globally, and this is in every country. I mean Hong Kong right now, the government here is no better, right? You really cannot depend on the government to do things right now. What the government can do is set regulation to incentivize businesses to solve these problems, right? So, for example, if the government reduces the tax on electric cars, okay, then you're incentivizing the businesses to solve the problems. But eventually, this is historically, right? These problems have always been solved by businesses. The government's never invented squat, right? And so that comes into the second part of what you were saying, which is, can we make business models that are able to do this, right? And let me actually change your thought. The way business is done today is unsustainable. Why? That business relies on oil, that business relies on resources that are limited. That business, the way business is done today, the way I ship my product with a diesel powered ship itself is unsustainable. In 20 years, it cannot be the case because it's right. So on the contrary, here's the thing: if you give a more sustainable solution, it will also be lower cost, right? And typically, the barrier is usually technology, right? And so we've seen this happen in electric cars. I think electric cars are the finest examples of a business model case where it's really scaling up. Even the big industry is just adopting it by and large now, and it's good for the environment. It's more sustainable and it's making bottom line money for everybody, right? And I absolutely think that is the way forward. So what we have seen is it's across the board, even with materials and packaging, right? So because consumer awareness has gone up, also government is banning a lot of these plastic bags in a lot of regions, single-use plastic bags. So there's a huge materials industry that's come up providing alternate packaging, paper, cellulose, all this, and I think that is going to overtake, right? And these guys are absolutely profitable for profit. So I think, on the contrary, it's more that we what's happening is a lot of the environmental issues, we are hitting a kind of wall. We are hitting a point where now the cost or the damage is going up so much, right? That it basically makes business sense to now move to a better solution, and that is the opportunity for a lot of companies to come up to create solutions.
And I'm sure Clearbot is the company which is capitalizing on that opportunity.
Well, thank you. Yes, that is our attempt as well. So we are
Right?
trying to look at the electric boat market, marine services, and say that okay, there's an
Correct.
opportunity.
Let's change the perspective, right? So far we have been talking about how do we use AI to solve the problems which are already existing. Let us for a moment try to switch the side and think about the problems which are created because of AI, right? So there is certainly a kind of uh, definition. We can say that there are good AI and bad AI. Bad AI, I can say if I can train a terrorist like a terror robot, that would also just go to a public place, or maybe a drone which can go to some other country and do all sort of things, right? So, and that is where a concept of responsible AI is coming up, where the startup community and the AI community have at least started talking about it, right? So how do you see this whole concept of responsible AI and the differentiation between good AI versus bad AI? And what are your thoughts? And that is where there is also a new discussion which is coming up related to whether AI use cases should be regulated, right? Whether there should be a law which regulates what can be done with AI, what cannot be done with AI. Right? So this whole concept of responsible AI and the good versus bad AI use cases and a need for legislation to regulate what can be done. What are your views about this whole discussion?
Sure. My view is quite simple. There is no good or bad AI. There are only good or bad people, right? So you mentioned like, okay, let's say this terrorist. Yeah, eventually somebody is making it, right? It's not. It's not the AI that's bad. It's fundamentally people. So I look at it this way: AI is just a tool. It is like the internet. It is like, I don't know, crypto. It is just another tool, right, for humanity. And I think, yes, of course, I think it's always good to have some kind of legislation to prevent misuse of AI,
Mhm.
right? But I think by and large, the issue is not that AI itself is bad. It's more that AI is powerful and people can misuse it, right? And let's put it this way: I think that people will more or less always find a way to misuse things, right? So,
Correct. So,
so in that regard, I think the solution kind of going forward is. I think it's a lot about the community, right? So I mean, as you said, so AI, the one advantage is, if you look at how AI has been built, it's a very community centric development, right? It's heavily based on open source stuff. Even the large companies, the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, are open sourcing swaths of their AI technology and getting people to use it, right? So I think the difference here is that, because of the size of the community, generally we are quite aware, at least right now, of what's going on, or and if there's any. So we see AI sometimes get bad data and then go crazy online, like when Facebook shut down something recently. So we see these kind of things in the news. I think the advantage is that the way as AI is being built, the community is on it, and hopefully going forward we're able to bring in good ethical education, for developers, for companies as well, like you and me, so that we don't end up investing or taking up projects where it's an issue. And I can assure you, I mean, I'm taking this call from Hong Kong. In China, this is a big problem because they use AI to monitor people, and it's this kind of objectively questionable uses, right? And so I think that it really varies from place to place, and you have to look at the culture and ethics, and developers and companies have to be responsible for it.
interesting. And that also brings me to another topic which is somewhat relevant. So, when we talk about responsible AI, there is a very neatly connected term called ethical AI, right? So, these are all new fancy terms which are now emerging among the AI community, and people love to talk about it, right? And like we never know how, when, and how these things would be implemented on the actual ground. So, what do you think about? So, let me bring back the discussion to the point that people, as you said, that AI is not good or bad; it's just a technology which can be used by the people for either good or bad purpose, right? So now, and we know that all sort of people exist in the world, so there would be definitely someone who's trying to do a train AI to do something which should not be done, which could be bad for the humankind, right? So that is where I believe that the law is required. I believe that is your opinion, that yes, there should be some sort of legislation. But yeah, the moment when somebody tries to give license, the government starts giving license to do something, it becomes like complicated. The whole concept of ease of doing business gets affected,
Mm.
right? So, what degree, like, what is your view to what extent AI should be regulated? To what extent we should rely on the ethics and conscience of people that okay, they'll put it to good use. And so, say if you have to make the public policy, right? If you are on the government side, how do you see this? That okay, or maybe from a businessman perspective, from an entrepreneur perspective, how much law would be good for you? How much law could be like too much regulation for you?
So, sure, that's a good question. I think, so what I would say is this, right? So typically, what I have observed with these technologies is the government doesn't directly get involved, right? Because, to be honest, they don't understand it themselves, right? If they did, they would get involved. So, and 100%, they don't want to mess up the ease of business, especially for a new emerging technology that can build the economy, right? So I think what is most likely is that we will have some kind of non-profit organization. So, for example, for the internet, there are a lot of regulatory non-profit organizations that actually run a lot of the protocols and maintain kind of the system, right?
Mhm.
Actually, it's the same for blockchain, as well. There's a lot of these non-profit organizations that run the basic infrastructure and policy, and so that's kind of what I see happening with AI as well, right? And I think that I don't think there will ever be a purely speaking a licensing system for AI. I mean, I think that is a bit out of expectation. But I think that what is possible is that we'll have classification systems, right? So much like with other things, like with your food, you get a green mark or an organic mark, right? Saying that, hey, this is high quality stuff, right? We've been ethical. We've been. I think that's kind of what we're going to see, which is like a lot of the AI companies are going to start. actively saying that, hey, no, we are ethical, we make sure our data sets are unbiased, and they're taking care of all these issues, and companies will start pushing to be ethically branded, at least, right? More so that they can get business, right? And I think that is just going to be how things go forward, rather than the government coming in, because that's not a win-win for anybody.
Correct. Yeah, so like when we see the people who are at the very influential position, right? Somebody like Elon Musk saying that okay, AI is very dangerous, so he is not really someone who like the technology, right? So and definitely someone like Elon, when he talks about something in either positive or negative, it becomes a news,
Goes
right? It becomes
goes
a household.
crazy. Yeah.
Right. So, and that is where I think a lot of these people, influential people, AI leaders, and all, who have started talking about these things, which is good stuff for us, right? Coming back to our discussion about societal and environmental problem. So, could you tell us, if you have to just try to understand from a broader perspective, how much work has been done with AI to solve these problems, and what can we expect in the next 10 years, right? I think that would be a good insight for our audience.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So, what has been done? Actually, a lot has been done, and a lot has been done, especially by the big tech companies, right? So, you look at the Microsofts and the Googles of the world, they have invested huge amounts of money into building AI to help solve climate issues and whatnot. And by the way, they've done it profitably because the World Bank was paying for it. Like, I mean, but nonetheless, right? So I think what we have now for the first time is, because of AI, a much better understanding of what's going on, right? Especially with environmental issues, even social imbalance. The data is available at a scale that it was never available before, right?
Mhm.
What I think is going to happen going forward. So I think we're going to see basic industry change, right? So I think you guys might have heard of ESG come in,
Yes.
right? Which is that basically, I think the difference is, if you look at CSR, which is the previous system, it's basically saying that, hey, I take 3% of my profits and I spend it on doing social good, right? But ESG is saying that, no, no, I realign my business actually to be sustainable over 100 years and make sure I'm not damaging society or the environment. And I
Correct.
think that is basically what we are seeing. So with AI generating this kind of understanding, a lot of the key industries today are now realizing that they need to make a change if they want to survive, right? A good example is Pepsi, Coca-Cola, right? We were recently speaking to somebody, and they were saying that over the next decade they want to replace all their plastic packaging, 100%, right? Because they've got data that shows how much of their packaging is ending up in the water, for example, and that's actually damaging to their brand. Like, young buyers are not going to buy. So we're seeing a lot of these very big brands in cars, materials, food and beverage. These companies that have been around for 100 years doing very big changes, right? Even energy companies, they're all moving to solar and sort of all renewable power. So I think that's where AI is bringing a lot of change, which is, first is at the understanding level. A lot of these industries are getting an insane amount of insights for the first time, and they're realizing that, hey, for us to survive, we need to figure this out. We need to actually make a uh, sort of governmental change in the companies. And the second is, I think we're going to see a lot more adoption. So AI about 5 years ago was a kind of hot thing, right? Where everyone was starting an AI company. But I think what's happening now is, first, that's died out. And so the people who are creating companies now are solving real problems. And so I think we'll really see AI become a more normal part of our lives, much like how the internet is very normal to us now, right? And I think we're going to see that become more and more. Where we see AI doing small things around us is a very normal thing. So that's kind of where I think things are headed.
Awesome. So definitely we see the industry growing, right? And so, what are your goals at Open Ocean Camera and Clearbot? Where do like what are the next opportunities that the company would be chasing? It is it like when we talk about Clearbot? Is it what kind of new solutions are exploring in ocean mobility apart from the trash collections, apart from the weight carry cargo movement? Right? So, what should we expect from Clearbot and Open Ocean Camera? What should we expect from you in the next 5 years?
For sure. I mean, hopefully we're able to scale what we have. In new use cases, we're doing a lot of stuff. We're doing foam, we're doing oil, we're doing oil cleanup, foam cleanup, vegetation collection, all kinds of things. So even inspections and surveillance, automated inspections and surveillance in marine environments. So hopefully what you see is us scaling up, right? Also, we now have a boat in India. Just 2 weeks ago, we put our first boat
Oh,
in Bangalore. So hopefully you'll see us in India as well. You guys will be able to see us there. And with Open Ocean Camera, we are now trying to scale across fish farms. So for 2 years, we've been selling to marine researchers. Now we're trying to scale across fish farms, a much bigger sector. And so hopefully in the marine industry, both sides of it, both on the sort of fishing side, on the cargo and marine services side, you will be able to see our solutions become a part of that sort of economy. So fingers crossed.
Interesting, very interesting. Uh, the second last question that I have for you, right before I can let you go, a lot of good insights coming from you. So I would love to keep this discussion going. Right. The second last question that I would have for you is data is considered to be the food of AI, right? So, in fact, I was reading something a couple of days back, and they said that to build an AI solutions, it's a simple equation. You need model plus data. You can say model is the brain or and body of the whole AI solutions, and the data is the food and everything that it takes, right? So, how do you see the role of data evolving with the? So we can say data is the subset industry, right? It's a sub industry within the AI industry. How do you see the role of this whole data industry growing over the years as the AI is getting accelerated across various use cases, and the role of companies like Indika as an AI developer, right? Someone who is on the other side of the table. What do you really expect from companies like Indika when you have to build an AI solution?
That's a great question, Hardik. So I think we are already seeing this. I'm sure you are already seeing this, that the scale at which data can be processed is increasing every year, right? So what used to take, I don't know, 6 months to label, you can now do in 3 months. What used to take 3 months to label, next year you'll be able to do in 2 months, right? And we are seeing this across the board because the tools are getting more and more automated, at least semi-automated, right? The labeling tools, and it's not just for imaging. I think what we're also seeing is that variety of data is changing. So we're seeing, I mean, at least in the industry here, we're seeing a lot of music data, finance data. The nature of the data itself is kind of expanding, right? Where so I think that is this sort of second thing that's kind of going on. So one is the speed, one is the variety of the data that can be processed, and I think the third is kind of tying back into what you said, which is ethics, right? So we are seeing that over the last 2 years, there've been a lot of talks of bias in data sets, and so we are trying to see companies, at least the larger companies here, are putting a lot of effort into having diverse data sets or balanced data sets. And I think for companies like Indica, right, even in terms of just consultancy, being able to understand how the data affects the end product is very, very invaluable advice. And that is something that you can only get from experience, which is what you guys will have, right? So I think going forward, data is going to be a very essential industry. As you said, is the fuel of the AI engine, right? And I think it's gonna evolve in terms of, one is efficiency, number is two is the kind of variety of data that can be processed, like what can we actually work on, manipulate, and the third is actually data optimization, which is how can I play with this data, how can I label it, how can I balance this data set in a way that my end product out of that model is super high quality, right?
Okay.
And I think that these three pillars are where the data industry is going to kind of really grow on.
Interesting. So the last question, and it's a kind of fun question that I'm sure the audience would love to know. Your LinkedIn profile says that you hold Guinness World Record. So what is that world record, and tell us more about how you were able to achieve so much in such a young age. I believe you are very very young. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I hold a Guinness World Record for building the world's fastest robotic fish. And actually, the story is I came to Hong Kong 2015, about 7 years ago now. And before this, in India, I made a robot which came in the Limca Book of Records. And then so I said, okay, I want to go into Guinness Book of Records. That is the next step. So with the support of the university here, the university had the resources, the professors had the expertise. I was able to put together a project. And it took us 5 years. And in 2020, it's called the Vayu project. You can look it up online. We actually built the world's fastest robotic fish. So that is how I got my Guinness record. And yeah.
Awesome. So this is it. Do we have any question from the audience? Anything for Siddhant? Please feel free to address. Siddhant, do you have any message for our team? I believe most of the people who are here are from our team. So anything that you would like to say to our team?
I would like to say, well, congratulations first to your entire team, and thank you so much for being a support to us. Our business would not be there without you guys. So, as you said, you are the fuel to our AI. So, 100%. I really appreciate being able to work with everyone, and hopefully, able to work more in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Siddharth, for joining us today. It's a weekend, I know, and I'm sure you would have a lot of plans. But thanks a lot for joining us today, and we hope to continue working together and build great AI solutions which can solve some of the real problems for the society and as well as the environmental challenges.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Hardik. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for your time.